In-laws I never met tried to steal my family orchard by forwarding their mail there for months to prove residency and arrived with a moving trailer, but every envelope said return to sender. After the sheriff kicked them out, they kept coming back until they got arrested destroying my neighbor's property while trying to sneak onto my land. I, 38M, need to get this off my chest because the situation with my in-laws has escalated to a point I never thought possible. I've been with my wife Laura, 34F, for 7 years now, and for most of that time, her parents have been completely absent from our lives. That changed 6 months ago in the worst way imaginable. Some background is necessary to understand how we got here. I inherited a small apple orchard from my father 3 years ago. The property has been in my family since my great-grandfather planted the first trees back in the 1940s. It's about 40 acres total, with a main house, a storage barn, and rows of heirloom apple varieties that require constant maintenance. The orchard sits about 20 minutes outside of town with barely 3,000 people. Most folks around here have known my family for generations. I met Laura in what I can only describe as an unusual way. 7 years ago, I was at the hardware store in town, loading bags of fertilizer into my truck. She walked right up to me and asked if I needed help with seasonal picking work. She had mud on her boots and her hair was tied back in a practical ponytail. I was surprised by the direct approach, but I did need help that harvest season. I told her to come by the next morning at 6. She showed up at 5:30. For the next 3 weeks, she worked longer hours than I did. She knew how to handle the equipment, how to sort fruit by quality, and she never complained about the physical labor. Most people I hired quit after a few days. She stayed in the small cottage on the property that my father used to rent out to seasonal workers. After the harvest ended, I asked if she wanted to stay on for the winter pruning work. She agreed immediately. We started dating 4 months after she began working at the orchard. She moved into the main house after another 3 months. We got married in a simple ceremony at the county courthouse exactly 2 years after she first walked up to my truck. About 15 people attended, mostly my relatives and a few friends from town. The only person from her side was her uncle Robert, 61M. He showed up in a dusty pickup truck, wearing a flannel shirt and work boots. Robert owned a small cattle ranch about 4 hours north. He shook my hand, told me to take care of his niece, and stayed for the dinner we had at the local diner afterward. Before he left, he pulled me aside and mentioned that if I ever needed advice about dealing with difficult family situations, I should call him. At the time, I didn't understand what he meant. Laura rarely talked about her parents. In all our time together, she mentioned them maybe 5 times total. What I knew was limited. Her mother Holly, 62F, taught sociology at a university in the city. Her father Gordon, 64M, worked in some kind of administrative role at the same university. Laura grew up in a suburban neighborhood about 3 hours south of where we lived. She left home at 17 and went to live with her uncle Robert on his ranch. She stayed there until she turned 20, then got a degree in agricultural science, worked at a few corporate farms she hated, and eventually ended up looking for rural work in our area. When I asked why she didn't talk to her parents, she just said they had different views on how people should live their lives. That was the most detail she ever gave me. I didn't push. My own mother died when I was young, and my father passed 2 years before I met Laura. I understood that family situations could be complicated. The problem started in March of this year. I began receiving mail addressed to Holly and Gordon at my property address. The first few pieces were credit card offers. Then came bank statements. Then utility bills from companies we didn't use. Every single piece of mail had my orchard's address but their names. I wrote return to sender on each one and put them back in the mailbox. Laura saw the mail and went quiet. She picked up one of the envelopes, looked at the return address, and then placed it back down without saying anything. That night at dinner, she asked if I had told anyone my property address publicly or filled out any forms with it recently. I said no. She nodded and didn't bring it up again. The mail kept coming. By September, I had returned at least 30 pieces of mail addressed to them. I mentioned it to our postal carrier, an older woman named Ruth, 58F, who had delivered to this route for 20 years. She said she couldn't stop delivering properly addressed mail, even if the recipients didn't live there. She suggested I might want to contact the senders directly to correct the address. Then in early October, everything came to a head. It was a Tuesday morning around 10. I was in the barn organizing equipment when I heard a vehicle coming up the long driveway. We don't get many visitors. I walked outside and saw a white sedan pulling a small trailer. Laura came out of the house at the same time. The moment she saw the car, she stopped walking. 2 people got out. The woman was short and heavy, wearing expensive-looking clothes that seemed completely impractical for a rural property. The man was thin and wore glasses and a button-down shirt. They both looked around the property like they were inspecting it. The woman walked toward me with her hand extended. She introduced herself as Holly and gestured to the man as Gordon. She acted like we had met before, mentioning how nice it was to finally see the property in person. I looked at Laura. Her face had no expression, but her hands were clenched at her sides. Holly then said something that made my stomach drop. She said that with the university moving to remote teaching, they had decided to relocate to their property in the country for a while. She emphasized the word there in a way that made it clear this wasn't a casual visit. I told her this was my property. She smiled and said there seemed to be some confusion about the ownership situation. Gordon stayed silent behind her. Holly continued, saying they had been receiving mail at this address for months and had documentation to prove residency. She said her lawyer advised her this established their legal right to the property under some kind of tenancy law. I told them to leave. Holly's smile disappeared. She said they weren't going anywhere and that we could sort this out properly with authorities if needed. Gordon pulled out his phone. I called Sheriff Morrison, 54M, myself before Gordon could finish dialing. Morrison had gone to school with my father. He knew this land belonged to my family. He said he would be there in 15 minutes. While we waited, Holly tried a different approach. She walked toward Laura and said they just wanted to reconnect with their daughter. She said Laura had been out of touch for too long and they were worried about her. Laura stepped back and told them not to come any closer. Holly acted hurt, asking why her own daughter was being so hostile. Morrison arrived in his patrol car. He got out and greeted me by name. Holly immediately started talking. She had brought a folder full of the mail that had been sent to my address. She spread it out on the hood of Morrison's car, showing him bank statements, credit card bills, and other documents, all addressed to them at my property. Morrison picked up one of the envelopes. He turned it over and showed Holly the return to sender stamp I had written on the back. He picked up another. Same thing. He went through the entire stack. Every single piece had been marked as refused and returned. Holly's face changed. She started talking faster, saying that didn't matter because the mail had still been delivered to this address originally. Morrison shook his head. He said that deliberately having mail sent to an address where you don't live doesn't establish residency, especially when the actual property owner has consistently refused the mail. Holly switched tactics again. She said I was controlling Laura and keeping her isolated from her family. She said Laura had been manipulated into this lifestyle. Morrison looked at Laura and asked if she wanted to add anything. Laura stared directly at Holly and asked Morrison a question. She asked if he planned to invite his nephew Tyler to Christmas dinner this year. Morrison's expression changed immediately. Tyler was currently serving a 6-year sentence for embezzlement and drug possession. Everyone in the county knew about it because Tyler had worked at the county clerk's office before his arrest. It was the biggest scandal the town had seen in a decade. Morrison understood exactly what Laura was saying. He turned to Holly and Gordon and told them they needed to leave the property immediately. Holly started to argue. Morrison walked back to his patrol car and opened the driver's door. He said he would follow them back to the county line to make sure they actually left. They got in their car. Holly rolled down her window and shouted that this wasn't over. Morrison followed them down the driveway and onto the main road. I stood there with Laura until we couldn't see the cars anymore. That night, Laura called her Uncle Robert and told him what happened. I could hear him swearing on the other end of the line. After she hung up, she told me we needed to talk. We sat at the kitchen table and she explained more about her parents than she ever had before. She said her mother had always treated her like an experiment. Holly taught sociology and had written several papers on gender development and rural versus urban cultural values. When Laura was young, Holly tried to control every aspect of her life to fit whatever theory she was currently researching. When Laura showed interest in outdoor activities and practical skills, Holly became obsessed with documenting it. She took notes on everything Laura did. She scheduled appointments with child psychologists to discuss Laura's preferences. She tried to correct what she saw as improper gender socialization. It got worse when Laura became a teenager. Holly wanted her to pursue an academic career. Laura wanted to work with her hands. Holly saw this as a failure of her parenting approach. The fights became constant. When Laura turned 17, she packed a bag and took a bus to her uncle's ranch. Holly threatened to call the police and have her brought back. Robert told Holly that if she tried, he would tell everyone at her university about her treatment of Laura. Holly backed down. Laura stayed with Robert until she was 20. She said those were the first years of her life where she felt like she could make her own decisions. Holly and Gordon never visited. They sent letters occasionally, but Laura didn't respond. After she moved out and went to college, Holly tried to re-establish contact several times. Laura refused. The last time they spoke was 6 years ago, right before Laura moved to this area. I asked Laura why she thought they were trying to claim the orchard now. She said Holly probably saw it as a way to force her way back into Laura's life while also getting property she could use for her retirement. Holly had always talked about wanting to own rural land someday, but she had no interest in actually doing the work required to maintain it. She just liked the idea of it. 2 weeks after the confrontation, I went into town to pick up some supplies. I stopped at the diner for lunch. Holly was sitting at a booth near the back. She saw me and waved me over. Against my better judgment, I walked to her table. She said she wanted to apologize for the misunderstanding. She said she and Gordon had been looking for a place to stay during the pandemic and thought the orchard property had been sold to them by someone in my family. She claimed it was an honest mistake. I told her that was impossible because the property had never been for sale. Holly leaned forward and lowered her voice. She said Laura had always been confused about what she really wanted in life. She said Laura had latched onto me because I represented stability, but that eventually she would realize she was living the wrong life. She pulled a USB drive from her purse and placed it on the table. She said it contained documentation about Laura's childhood and development that would help me understand who Laura really was. I left the USB drive on the table and walked out. Update 1: I need to update this situation because things have gotten significantly worse, and I'm now dealing with legal issues I never anticipated. After I posted originally, several people suggested I look into restraining orders and property protection measures. I contacted a lawyer in the nearest city, about an hour away, and started documenting everything. The USB drive incident bothered me more than I initially admitted. After I left the diner that day, I went straight home and told Laura what happened. She asked if I had taken the drive. I said no. She looked relieved but also worried. She said that when she was young, her mother kept detailed records of everything she did. Holly would write reports about Laura's behavior, her interests, her social interactions, everything. Laura had found some of these reports when she was 15, hidden in her mother's home office. Reading them had been one of the reasons she eventually left. Laura asked me to call her Uncle Robert again. We put him on speakerphone and explained the situation with the USB drive. Robert was quiet for a long time. Then he told us something that changed my entire understanding of Holly's behavior. About 25 years ago, when Laura was still a baby, Holly and Gordon had tried to do something similar to Robert's ranch. Robert's father had owned 200 acres of cattle land. When he died, he split the property 3 ways between his children, Robert, Gordon, and their sister Michelle. Michelle sold her share to Robert immediately because she lived on the East Coast and had no interest in ranching. Gordon initially told Robert he could use his portion of the land in exchange for a small percentage of the profits. This arrangement lasted for 3 years. Then Holly convinced Gordon to sell his share to Robert for a significant amount of money. Gordon needed the funds to pay for Holly's doctorate program. Robert took out a loan and bought the land to keep the ranch intact. Everything was handled through lawyers and properly documented. 5 years later, Holly and Gordon showed up at the ranch and said they wanted to move there. Robert, trying to maintain family peace, said they could stay in the guest house for a while. They lasted 4 days. Holly complained about everything. The work was too hard. The smell was unpleasant. The isolation was unbearable. But she loved telling her university colleagues that her family owned a ranch. 6 months after they left, Gordon called Robert and said Holly wanted to buy back into the ranch. She claimed the original sale had been under duress and that Gordon hadn't fully understood what he was giving up. She wanted partial ownership restored without paying anything. Robert hired a lawyer. The lawyer reviewed the sale documents, confirmed everything was legitimate, and sent a letter to Holly and Gordon stating they had no legal claim. Holly tried to push the issue for another few months, then finally gave up. Robert said most of the family stopped talking to Gordon after that. Robert maintained minimal contact only because Gordon was his brother, but he never trusted Holly again. When Laura showed up at his ranch years later, running away from her parents, Robert understood exactly why she had left. Hearing this story made everything click into place. Holly's attempt to claim my orchard was almost identical to what she had tried with Robert's ranch. The fake mail evidence, the claims of ownership, the attempts at legal manipulation, it was the same pattern. I asked Robert why he hadn't warned me about this possibility earlier. He said he honestly didn't think Holly would try the same scheme twice, especially after it had failed so badly the first time. He also said he had tried to hint at potential problems at my wedding, but he didn't want to overstep boundaries by explicitly badmouthing Laura's parents before there was any actual problem. After talking with Robert, Laura and I decided to take more serious precautions. We installed a camera system at the entrance to the property. We put up new no trespassing signs. Our lawyer sent a formal cease and desist letter to Holly and Gordon at their home address. The letter outlined the situation, referenced the previous incident with Robert's ranch, and made it clear that any further attempts to claim ownership would result in immediate legal action. For about 2 weeks, everything was quiet. I started to think maybe the legal letter had actually worked. Then I got a call from Morrison. He said he needed to talk to me about something that had happened in town. Apparently, Holly had been going around to various businesses in town, telling people that she and Gordon were Laura's parents and they were worried about her well-being. She had visited the diner, the hardware store, the feed supply shop, and even the post office. She told people that Laura was being isolated from her family and that I was controlling her finances and communications. She asked people to contact her if they saw Laura alone so she could talk to her without me present. Most people in town knew me and Laura. They didn't believe Holly's stories. But the rumors still spread. People started asking me questions. Someone asked Laura directly if everything was okay at home. The local pastor, Father Vincent, 67M, called Morrison to ask what was going on. He said he had heard concerning things about a situation involving a young woman being isolated from her family, and he wanted to know if there was anything the church community should do to help. Morrison told Father Vincent the real story. He explained that Holly and Gordon had tried to illegally claim property they didn't own, and now they were spreading false information around town because they hadn't gotten their way. Morrison used Laura's comparison about his nephew Tyler again. He told Father Vincent that Holly was not a concerned mother but someone trying to manipulate her way into controlling her daughter's life and property. Father Vincent apparently took this seriously. The next Sunday, he gave a sermon about bearing false witness and the importance of protecting community members from manipulation and deceit. He didn't name anyone specifically, but everyone in town knew what he was talking about. Laura and I weren't there, but at least 5 people mentioned it to us over the next few days. The situation seemed to settle down after that. Holly stopped showing up in town. The rumors died down. I thought maybe she had finally given up. Then 3 nights ago, something happened that moved this situation into criminal territory. I was woken up around 2 in the morning by my phone ringing. It was my neighbor to the west, a man named Harold, 71M, who owned a small cherry orchard on the property adjacent to mine. Harold was calling to tell me that someone had tried to break into his property and had damaged his equipment in the process. Harold had motion-activated lights and cameras set up around his property because he had problems with deer getting into his trees. His system had triggered around 1:30. When he checked the footage, he saw 2 people cutting through his fence line, trying to access my property from the back rather than coming up the main driveway where my cameras were. The 2 people had walked right into Harold's irrigation setup in the dark. One of them tripped over a control valve and fell into a section of pipe. The pipe broke. Water started spraying everywhere. The person who fell started yelling. Harold had called the sheriff's department immediately. Morrison arrived at Harold's property with a deputy. They found Holly and Gordon soaking wet, standing in Harold's orchard, trying to explain that they had gotten lost and accidentally wandered onto his land. Harold showed Morrison the footage of them deliberately cutting his fence. Morrison arrested them both. They were taken to county lockup. Harold pressed charges for criminal trespassing and destruction of property. The broken irrigation pipe was going to cost about $800 to repair, and the fence damage was another couple hundred. Because they had been attempting to use Harold's property to access mine after being previously warned to stay away, additional charges were being considered. I drove to Harold's property the next morning to assess the damage and apologize for dragging him into the situation. Harold waved off the apology. He said Holly and Gordon had made their own choices, and they deserved whatever consequences came from those choices. He did mention that he found it strange that 2 people their age would be stumbling around in the dark, trying to break into property that didn't belong to them. Laura and I went to see Morrison later that day. He said Holly and Gordon had been released on bail but had to return for a court date in 6 weeks. As a condition of their bail, they were not allowed within 5 miles of my property or Harold's property. Morrison also mentioned that during questioning, Holly had claimed they were trying to reach Laura because they had concerns about her safety, but when pressed for specifics, she couldn't provide any evidence or concrete examples. Our lawyer advised us to file for a formal restraining order now that there was a criminal case attached to the situation. We started that process yesterday. The paperwork should be filed by the end of this week. What bothers me most about all of this is Holly's persistence. Even after being arrested, even after facing criminal charges, she seems convinced that she has some kind of right to this property and to controlling Laura's life. I don't understand that level of fixation. Laura has been handling this better than I expected. She hasn't cried or gotten angry. She just seems tired. Last night, she told me she wasn't surprised by any of this. She said Holly had always been someone who believed her intelligence and education gave her the right to override other people's choices. Holly had never accepted that Laura might have a valid reason for living differently than Holly thought she should. I asked Laura if she had any regrets about cutting her parents out of her life. She said the only thing she regretted was not being more explicit about it earlier. If she had filed legal documents or sent formal letters making it clear she wanted no contact, maybe this whole situation could have been prevented. I'm not sure that's true, but I understand why she feels that way. Update 2: the court date for Holly and Gordon happened last week, and the outcome was worse for them than I expected. This update is going to be shorter than the previous ones because the situation has mostly resolved itself in the legal sense, but there are some additional details that came out during the court proceedings that I think are worth documenting. Harold's lawyer and our lawyer both attended the hearing. Holly and Gordon had hired their own attorney, someone from the city who clearly didn't understand rural property laws or small-town dynamics. Their lawyer tried to argue that the whole situation was a misunderstanding and that Holly and Gordon had simply been trying to visit their daughter. The prosecutor shut that down immediately by pointing out that accessing someone's property by cutting through a neighbor's fence at 1:30 in the morning is not a reasonable way to attempt a family visit. The judge handling the case was a woman in her 60s who had lived in the county her entire life. She reviewed the evidence, including Harold's security footage, the previous incidents documented by Morrison, and the cease and desist letter our lawyer had sent. She was not sympathetic to Holly and Gordon's explanations. Holly tried to speak directly to the judge at one point, saying that as Laura's mother, she had a right to know that her daughter was safe. The judge cut her off and said that adult children have no obligation to maintain contact with their parents, and that parents have no legal right to access property that doesn't belong to them, regardless of who lives there. Gordon was found guilty of criminal trespassing and destruction of property. Holly was found guilty of the same charges. They were each fined $1,500 in order to pay restitution to Harold for the damaged equipment, which came out to about $1,000 total. They were also given suspended jail sentences of 30 days each, meaning if they violated any laws in the next year, they would serve that time automatically. The judge also granted our request for a restraining order. Holly and Gordon are not allowed within 10 miles of our property for the next 3 years. They are not allowed to contact Laura or me through any means, including phone, email, mail, or third parties. If they violate the order, they can be arrested immediately. After the sentencing, Holly's lawyer approached our lawyer in the hallway outside the courtroom. He said Holly wanted to know if there was any way to arrange supervised contact with Laura. Our lawyer said no. The lawyer then asked if Holly could at least send letters through their office. Our lawyer said any contact of any kind would be a violation of the restraining order and would result in immediate legal action. What came out during the trial that I hadn't known before was that Holly had been in contact with a local real estate agent about 2 months before she first showed up at the orchard. The prosecutor had subpoenaed records that showed Holly had been asking about properties in the area and had specifically mentioned my orchard's address. The real estate agent had told her the property wasn't for sale and wasn't listed anywhere. Holly had then asked about adverse possession laws and tenancy rights in the county. This proved that Holly's claim about an honest misunderstanding was completely false. She had been planning this for months. The fake mail, the sudden appearance, the claims of ownership, all of it had been calculated and premeditated. After the trial, Laura and I went to visit Robert at his ranch. We hadn't seen him in person since all of this started, and Laura wanted to thank him for giving us the information about the previous incident with his property. Robert made dinner for us, and we spent the evening talking about everything that had happened. Robert told us some additional details about Holly that he hadn't mentioned before. He said that about 10 years ago, Holly had tried to contact him about writing a book. She wanted to document her experiences raising a daughter who rejected urban academic life in favor of rural manual labor. She had wanted Robert to contribute stories about Laura's time on his ranch. Robert had refused and told Holly that if she ever tried to publish anything about Laura without her permission, he would hire a lawyer to stop it. Robert said Holly had been furious. She sent him several angry emails accusing him of sabotaging her career and preventing important research from being shared. Robert blocked her email and hadn't heard from her since. Learning this made me realize Holly's obsession with Laura wasn't just about control or property. It was also about Holly's academic ego. She saw Laura as a case study, a project that hadn't produced the results she wanted. The fact that Laura had actively rejected everything Holly valued was something Holly couldn't accept. We left Robert's ranch the next morning. On the drive home, Laura asked me if I thought Holly would actually follow the restraining order. I said I didn't know, but I hoped the suspended jail sentence would be enough motivation. Laura said she wasn't sure anything would stop Holly permanently, but at least now there were legal consequences if she tried anything else. That was 4 days ago. Since then, everything has been quiet. No more incidents, no more surprise visits, no more rumors in town. Morrison stopped by yesterday to check on us and said he hadn't heard anything from Holly or Gordon since the trial. Harold came by this morning to let me know his insurance had covered most of the irrigation repair, and the restitution payment from Holly and Gordon would cover the rest. He said he was glad the situation had been resolved before it escalated further. I thanked him for pressing charges and for being willing to testify. He said that was just what neighbors did for each other around here. The restraining order is in place for 3 years. Our lawyer said if Holly or Gordon violate it even once, we can request an extension. Laura and I have decided to keep the security cameras up permanently and to maintain detailed records of everything, just in case. I still don't fully understand what Holly thought would happen. Did she really believe she could claim ownership of property that had been in my family for generations just by having mail sent there? Did she think she could force Laura back into a relationship through manipulation and legal tricks? None of it makes sense to me. But maybe that's the point. Maybe it doesn't have to make sense. Some people can't accept that others make different choices than they would make. Holly wanted Laura to be someone she wasn't, and when Laura refused, Holly decided that meant Laura needed to be fixed or controlled or brought back in line. The orchard was just a means to that end. Update 3: This will be my last update on this situation unless something dramatic changes, which I doubt will happen at this point. It's been 4 months since the trial, and we haven't heard anything from Holly or Gordon. The restraining order is still in effect, and as far as I know, they followed it. I wanted to post this final update to close out the story and to address a few things that have happened since. About 6 weeks after the trial, I got a call from an unfamiliar number. I didn't answer, but they left a voicemail. It was a woman who identified herself as Holly's sister, someone named Margaret. She said she had only recently learned about what happened with the trial and the restraining order. She said she wanted to apologize on behalf of the family and to let us know that she had spoken with Holly and tried to make her understand how inappropriate her behavior had been. I played the voicemail for Laura. She looked surprised. She said she hadn't spoken to Margaret in over 10 years and hadn't even known Margaret was still in contact with Holly. Laura called Robert to ask if he knew anything about Margaret reaching out. Robert said Margaret had called him too, about 3 weeks earlier. Margaret had apparently been asking questions about what Holly had done and why the family had cut contact with her and Gordon years ago. Laura decided not to return Margaret's call. She said Margaret had never been particularly involved in her life and had always sided with Holly in family disagreements. Even if Margaret's apology was genuine, Laura didn't see any point in reopening communication with that side of the family. I respected her decision, though part of me wondered if Margaret might have useful information about whether Holly was planning anything else. I decided to call Margaret back myself, without telling Laura initially. Margaret answered on the second ring. She was polite but direct. She said she had spoken with the real estate agent Holly had contacted before all of this started. The agent was a friend of Margaret's, and she had mentioned Holly's strange questions about adverse possession at a dinner party. Margaret hadn't thought much of it at the time, but after learning about the trial, she realized Holly had been planning the orchard scheme for much longer than anyone knew. Margaret said she had confronted Holly about it. Holly had apparently defended her actions by saying Laura had been brainwashed by rural life and needed to be rescued. Holly claimed she had been trying to create a situation where Laura would be forced to come back to the city and live near her parents again. The orchard was supposed to become a weekend retreat that Holly and Gordon would own, and they would graciously allow Laura and me to stay there as guests or caretakers. In Holly's mind, this would prove to Laura that her parents were generous and caring, and Laura would eventually appreciate what they had tried to do. Margaret said she had told Holly this plan was delusional and controlling. Holly had apparently ended the conversation by saying Margaret didn't understand because Margaret had never had children. They hadn't spoken since. I thanked Margaret for the information. She asked me to tell Laura that if she ever wanted to talk, Margaret would be available. I said I would pass along the message but that Laura would make her own decision about that. Margaret understood. When I told Laura about the call, she listened without interrupting. After I finished, she was quiet for a while. Then she said she appreciated Margaret reaching out, but she didn't see any reason to reconnect with that part of her family. Too much time had passed, and Margaret had never been someone Laura felt close to anyway. The other significant thing that happened was Harold decided to sell his cherry orchard. He's in his 70s, and he said the incident with Holly and Gordon had reminded him that he was getting too old to manage the property alone. He sold it to a younger couple from the next county over who wanted to expand from berries into tree fruit. They moved in last month. The new neighbors seemed fine. They introduced themselves, brought over some preserves they had made, and mentioned they had heard about the situation with my in-laws. They said Harold had told them everything during the sale negotiations because he wanted them to know what they might be dealing with. I appreciated the honesty. They seem like the kind of people who will mind their own business but also look out for their neighbors. Laura's relationship with Robert has gotten stronger through all of this. We've driven up to visit him twice since the trial, and he came down here once to help with pruning work during the winter. Laura seems more relaxed around him than I've ever seen her. I think finally cutting off her parents permanently, with legal backing, has lifted something she had been carrying for years. We still get the occasional question from people in town about what happened. The story has turned into local legend. Most people are sympathetic and supportive. A few have made comments about how sad it is when families fall apart, which annoys Laura more than me. She usually responds by saying that sometimes families are better off apart, and people generally drop the subject after that. Our lawyer recently sent us a letter confirming that there have been no violations of the restraining order and that everything appears to be proceeding normally. She said if we wanted to request an extension at the end of the 3 years, we could, but we would need to provide evidence of continued threat or harassment. For now, we're just documenting everything and hoping Holly and Gordon have finally moved on. I've thought a lot about why I posted this story here originally. I think I needed to write it all down to make sense of it. The whole situation felt surreal while it was happening. Looking back at these posts, I can see the pattern more clearly. Holly was never going to stop on her own. She needed to be stopped by external forces, the law, the community, her own criminal behavior catching up with her. Laura asked me last week if I regretted how everything turned out. I said no. I regretted that it happened at all, but I didn't regret how we handled it. We protected ourselves, we followed legal processes, and we didn't let Holly manipulate us into giving her what she wanted. Laura said she didn't regret it either. She said the only thing she wished was that she had been more explicit about cutting her parents off years ago. Maybe if she had filed legal paperwork or sent formal no-contact letters back when she first moved to the area, Holly wouldn't have thought she could just show up and force her way back in. I'm not sure that's true. From everything I learned about Holly, I think she would have tried this regardless. Some people can't accept that they don't have control over other people's lives. Holly was one of those people. The fact that she was stopped doesn't mean she accepted it. It just means she ran out of legal options. The orchard is doing well. We had a decent harvest last fall, and the trees are already budding for this spring. Laura is still here, still working alongside me, still choosing this life every single day. That's what matters most. Holly tried to take that choice away, and she failed. I don't expect to post about this again. If Holly violates the restraining order, I'll report it to Morrison and let the legal system handle it. If she leaves us alone, then this story is finished. Either way, Laura and I are moving forward. Now let's move to the next story. Story 2. My girlfriend's ex called me at 1 a.m. saying he was still in love with her. I stayed on the phone for an hour. When she found out, she nearly ended things. I, 28M, met Sarah, 25F, About a month ago at my friend's housewarming party. From the moment we were introduced, we clicked right away. She has this great laugh that makes everyone around her smile, and she's incredibly smart, works as a research assistant at the local university while finishing her master's degree. I got her number that night, and we started texting back and forth pretty much every day after that. Over the past 3 weeks, we've only been able to meet up 4 times for actual dates because both of us have busy schedules. I work as a community outreach coordinator for a nonprofit, which sometimes means odd hours, and she's juggling work and grad school. Despite not seeing each other much in person, we've been talking constantly. I really like her, and it seemed like she was feeling the same way about me. Even with such a new relationship, I could tell there was serious potential between us. During one of our earlier conversations, Sarah mentioned her ex-boyfriend, Mark. She told me they were together for about 1.5 years, and they broke up around 2 months before she met me. According to Sarah, she was the one who ended things because Mark wouldn't work on some ongoing issues they had in their relationship. She said she had brought up these problems multiple times, but he kept promising to change without actually doing anything differently. That was all the information I had about their relationship, just the basics. Last Friday night, Sarah invited me to meet her and some of her friends at a local bar. I was excited about it because we hadn't seen each other in almost a week due to our schedules. When I got there, Sarah introduced me to 3 of her friends, Tina, Jessica, and Peter. We ordered a round of drinks, and everything was going well for about 45 minutes. Then I got a call from my roommate, Brian. He was locked out of our apartment, had lost his phone somewhere earlier in the night, and was using a stranger's phone to call me. He sounded panicked because he had an early morning flight the next day and needed to get in to finish packing. I quickly told Sarah I had an emergency with my roommate and needed to leave. Looking back, I didn't properly explain the situation. I basically just said I had to go help Brian with something urgent and rushed out. When I got home, I let Brian in, and he was extremely grateful. By the time everything was sorted out, it was already past midnight, too late to head back to the bar. Brian offered me a beer to thank me for coming to his rescue, and we ended up having a couple of drinks while talking about random stuff. By 1 a.m., I was feeling pretty relaxed after 2 beers, not drunk, just mellow. That's when my phone rang with an unknown number. I usually don't answer calls from numbers I don't recognize, especially that late, but for some reason, I picked up. Maybe it was the beer, or maybe I thought it might be Sarah calling from one of her friends' phones. The guy on the other end introduced himself as Mark, and immediately added that he was the guy who's in love with Sarah. I was completely surprised and should have hung up right then. Instead, I stayed on the line. I'm still not entirely sure why I did that. Maybe it was the couple of beers I'd had, or maybe I thought I could handle the situation maturely. In the past, I've had exes reach out to me about my then girlfriends, and those interactions never went well. Maybe I thought this time could be different. For nearly the first 30 minutes of the call, Mark went from making vague threatening comments to begging me to give her back to eventually just going on long, rambling monologues about his life and his relationship with Sarah. I couldn't get a word in for most of the conversation. He was just off on these tangents. When he finally ran out of steam, I started talking. I told him about my own experience with breakups, how hard they can be, but also how important it is to respect the other person's decision. I explained that unrequited feelings can be harmful to both people if you don't accept reality and move forward. I suggested that he should try going no contact with Sarah for his own sake and focus on improving himself instead. This went on for another 30 minutes or so. By the end of the hour-long conversation, Mark seemed calmer. He thanked me for listening to him, and we ended the call on what seemed like a positive note. I went to bed thinking I had actually handled the situation pretty well and maybe even helped the guy find some closure. The next morning, I woke up to a text from an unknown number, which I assumed was Mark, thanking me for helping him out and wishing me the best of luck with Sarah. I didn't think much of it until about 10 minutes later when Sarah called me. She was furious. The first words out of her mouth were asking what the hell I thought I was doing talking to her ex-boyfriend for an hour. Apparently, Mark had sent her the exact same text he sent me. I explained what happened, that he called me out of the blue, and I ended up talking to him, and apologized for getting involved in her business with her ex. She didn't seem satisfied with my explanation or apology, and for the past 2 days, her messages have been extremely short and cold. Here's the thing, I don't actually feel that bad about talking to Mark. He's the one who called me. I later found out he got my number from our nonprofit's website where my contact information is listed publicly. I didn't seek him out or try to meddle in their past relationship. And honestly, I thought I was being helpful by encouraging him to move on. It seems weird to me that Sarah is so upset about this. Is talking to an ex and encouraging them to move on really such a big deal? I really like Sarah and want to make things right, but I'm not sure if I actually crossed any boundaries here. Should I have just hung up as soon as I realized who was calling? Was it wrong to try to give him advice about moving on? Update 1. It's been exactly a week since everything went down with Mark's phone call, and a lot has happened. I wanted to update everyone because the situation turned out to be much more complicated than I initially understood. The day after I posted here, I texted Sarah and asked if we could meet in person to talk things through. She agreed, and we decided to meet at a coffee shop near her apartment later that evening. I spent the entire day thinking about what everyone here said and trying to understand why she was so upset. Before meeting with Sarah, I did a lot of reflecting on my actions. I realized that engaging with someone's ex for an hour, especially when I barely knew anything about their relationship or breakup, probably wasn't the smartest move. Several people in the comments mentioned the possibility that Mark could have been showing stalker-like behavior, which honestly hadn't even crossed my mind. That thought made my stomach turn. When I arrived at the coffee shop, Sarah was already there, sitting at a table in the corner. She didn't smile when she saw me, which was a stark contrast to how she usually greeted me. We ordered our drinks and sat in awkward silence for a minute before I started to apologize. Before I could finish, Sarah cut me off and told me there were things about her relationship with Mark that I didn't know. According to her, she had fallen out of love with Mark months before they actually broke up. She kept trying to make it work because they had been together for so long, but Mark refused to address any of their issues. He would promise to change, then go right back to his old behaviors a week later. After they broke up, Mark didn't take it well. He had called her drunk twice in the 2 months since their breakup, begging for another chance. Each time, she had hung up immediately and blocked his new number. She had also blocked him on all social media platforms and told her friends not to give him any information about her. Sarah explained that she has a strict no-contact rule with exes, not just because of Mark's behavior, but because it's how she personally copes with breakups. She needs a clean break to move on properly. When Mark texted her saying he had spoken to me, it felt like a massive violation of the boundaries she had been trying to establish. Then came the part that made me feel even worse. Sarah told me that the night at the bar wasn't just any night out with friends, it was the first time she was introducing me to her 3 closest friends from college. It was a big step for her, and she had been nervous about it all week. When I left suddenly with minimal explanation, she felt embarrassed in front of her friends and worried that I wasn't as interested in her as she was in me. To make matters worse, while she was dealing with the disappointment of our evening being cut short, I was apparently having a heart-to-heart with her ex-boyfriend instead of texting her to explain what happened or to see how the rest of her night went. I apologized again, this time with a much better understanding of why she was upset. I explained that the emergency with my roommate was genuine, he really was locked out and needed to get into pack for an early flight. I admitted I should have explained that more clearly at the time and should have texted her afterward. I also told her unequivocally that talking to Mark was a mistake, regardless of who initiated the contact. She nodded and said she appreciated my apology. Then she surprised me by apologizing too, for not making it clear how important the night was to her and for how coldly she had treated me over the past few days. She admitted that part of her anger was actually directed at one of her friends, Tina, who had remained friends with Mark after the breakup and had been feeding him information about Sarah despite knowing how she felt about maintaining no contact. As our conversation continued, the tension between us gradually eased. We moved from the coffee shop to a nearby restaurant for dinner, and by the end of the meal, we were laughing together again. Sarah told me she admired that I had tried to help Mark find closure, even if it wasn't my place to do so. She wasn't sure if our conversation would help him move on or just encourage him to keep trying to remain connected to her life in some way. We ended up going back to my place after dinner and had one of the most honest conversations I've ever had with someone I've dated. We talked about our previous relationships, our expectations for this relationship, and our communication styles. Sarah explained more about why maintaining clear boundaries with exes is so important to her, and I shared my tendency to try to fix other people's problems sometimes when I should just listen instead. By the end of the night, it felt like we had not only repaired the damage from the Mark incident but had actually strengthened our connection. We've spent almost every night together since then, and things between us feel more solid than they did before. As for Mark, we haven't heard anything from him since those text messages the morning after our phone call. Sarah seems relieved about that, and I've promised her that if he ever contacts me again, I'll immediately let her know and not engage with him. The whole experience taught me a lot about respecting boundaries, the importance of clear communication, and not making assumptions about situations I don't fully understand. I'm grateful for everyone's advice here, especially those who pointed out the potential seriousness of the situation that I had completely missed. Update 2: It's been about a month since my last update, and I wanted to share what's happened since then because things have taken yet another unexpected turn. Sarah and I have been doing really well. After our big talk, we fell into a comfortable rhythm together. We've been seeing each other much more frequently, at least 3 or 4 times a week now, and things have been great between us. Last week, I even met her parents when they came to town for a visit, which felt like another significant step forward. However, last Saturday, something happened that brought the whole Mark situation back to the surface. Sarah and I were at my apartment watching a movie when she got a call from her friend Tina. Sarah stepped into the kitchen to take the call, but when she came back, she looked upset. She told me that Mark had shown up at a birthday party for one of their mutual friends the night before, and according to Tina, he had been asking questions about Sarah and me. This obviously concerned both of us, especially since we hadn't heard anything from him in a month. Sarah decided to reach out to some other friends who were at the party to get more information. What she found out was disturbing. Apparently, Mark had been telling people that he and Sarah were working things out and that I was just a temporary distraction for her. He had been spinning this narrative to several of their mutual acquaintances over the past few weeks. Even worse, He had been showing people screenshots of text conversations that he claimed were recent exchanges between him and Sarah, though Sarah insisted they must be old messages from when they were still together. The next day, Sarah received an email from Mark. She had blocked his number, but not his email address. In it, he apologized for any confusion but maintained that they had indeed been in contact recently. He attached screenshots of what appeared to be recent text conversations between them. When Sarah showed me these screenshots, something seemed off about them. The dates looked current, but certain details didn't add up. For one thing, in these supposed texts, Sarah referred to her current research project by its old name, a name that had been changed months ago before she even met me. There were other inconsistencies too, like references to plans they had supposedly made for events that Sarah had actually attended with me. With Sarah's permission, I took a closer look at the screenshots. Having some basic knowledge of photo editing from my work, I was able to spot signs that the screenshots had been manipulated. The dates had been changed, and some parts of the conversations appeared to be spliced together from different exchanges. Sarah was both relieved and furious when I pointed this out. She immediately wrote to their mutual friends explaining that Mark had falsified evidence and was spreading lies about their relationship status. She also sent Mark a firmly worded email telling him that if he continued this behavior, she would consider getting a restraining order. A few days later, we learned from Tina, who, despite everything, was still in contact with Mark, that Mark had been seeing a therapist since our phone conversation. According to Tina, Mark admitted to his therapist that he had fabricated the screenshots because he couldn't accept that Sarah had moved on. His therapist apparently helped him see how destructive and inappropriate his behavior was. Mark sent Sarah another email, this time with a genuine apology. He acknowledged that he had manipulated the screenshots and lied to their friends. He said he was working through his issues in therapy and promised not to contact her again or spread any more false information. Sarah was skeptical but hoped this meant the end of the drama. She decided not to pursue the restraining order as long as Mark kept his distance, but she made it clear to all their mutual friends that she wanted absolutely no information about him going forward. This whole situation has been a stark reminder of how complicated relationships can be, especially when they end one-sidedly. I feel fortunate that Sarah and I were able to handle this together as a team rather than letting it drive us apart. If anything, dealing with this mess has shown us both how much we value the honest communication we've established in our relationship. For now, we're cautiously optimistic that Mark will keep his word and stay out of our lives. Sarah has asked Tina to respect her boundaries regarding Mark, and for once, Tina seems to be taking it seriously. We're focusing on our relationship and trying not to let Mark's actions affect us any more than they already have. Update 3. It's been 3 months since my last update, and I wanted to share a final update on the situation with Sarah, Mark, and me. The good news first, Sarah and I are still together and doing better than ever. Last month, her lease ended, and after much discussion, she moved in with me. It might seem fast to some people, but it felt right for us. Living together has been surprisingly easy so far. We complement each other well in our day-to-day habits. As for Mark, he has kept his word and maintained no contact with either of us. About a month after my last update, Sarah ran into him at a grocery store. According to her, he nodded politely from a distance but didn't approach her or try to start a conversation. She said it was a bit awkward but ultimately reassuring that he seemed to be respecting her boundaries. We later heard through mutual friends that Mark started dating someone new about 6 weeks ago. Sarah was genuinely happy for him when she heard this news, hoping it meant he had truly moved on. Unfortunately, not everything has resolved so neatly. Sarah's friendship with Tina has effectively ended. Despite promising to respect Sarah's wishes regarding Mark, Tina continued to bring him up in conversation and share information about Sarah with him. The final straw came when Tina invited both Sarah and Mark to a dinner party without telling either of them that the other would be there. Sarah decided that Tina simply couldn't be trusted to respect her boundaries, and she didn't want to maintain a friendship with someone who consistently disregarded her feelings. She explained her decision to Tina in a long email and then stopped responding to Tina's messages. It was a difficult decision for Sarah because they had been friends since their freshman year of college, but she felt it was necessary for her peace of mind. Looking back on everything that's happened since that fateful phone call with Mark, I've learned some valuable lessons. First and foremost, I've learned the importance of respecting boundaries, both my partners and those of people outside our relationship. I still believe I had good intentions when I spoke with Mark that night, but good intentions don't always lead to good outcomes. I've also gained a deeper appreciation for clear communication. So many of the problems we faced could have been avoided or minimized if I had been clearer about the roommate emergency that night at the bar, or if Sarah had expressed the significance of meeting her friends beforehand. As for my relationship with Sarah, weathering these early storms together has ultimately strengthened our bond. We've seen how each of us handles stress and conflict, and we've built trust through honest conversations and consistent actions. We're planning a trip together next month to celebrate 6 months of dating, something that seemed uncertain during those tense days after the phone call. If there's one thing this whole experience has taught me, it's that new relationships are fragile things that require care and attention to flourish. Sarah and I almost let a misunderstanding and poor judgment derail what has become the most meaningful relationship I've had. I'm grateful every day that we found a way through it together. For anyone finding themselves in a similar situation, if an ex reaches out to you about your current partner, just don't engage. No matter how well-intentioned you might be, it's a boundary that's usually best left uncrossed. Now let's move to the next story. Story 2. I took out massive loans for college while my parents paid for my sister's tuition. Now they want $50,000 from me and I refused. 18 months later, my pregnancy revealed a shocking truth about my family. I, 32F, have always had a complicated relationship with my parents, especially my mom, 58F. Growing up in a small Midwestern town, our family seemed picture perfect from the outside: hardworking dad, devoted homemaker mom, and 2 daughters. But behind closed doors, it was a different story. From as early as I can remember, it was clear that my younger sister Betty, 29F, was the golden child. She was born when I was 3, and I still have vivid memories of being shuffled off to my grandparents' house for weeks while my mom focused all her attention on the new baby. At first, I thought it was just because Betty was little and needed more care. But as the years went by, the pattern continued. Betty excelled in academics and sports from an early age. She was reading chapter books by kindergarten, winning spelling bees in elementary school, and dominating on the soccer field by middle school. I, on the other hand, struggled with dyslexia that went undiagnosed until I was 12. My parents, particularly my mom, saw my difficulties as laziness rather than a learning disability. I vividly remember sitting at the kitchen table in tears, trying to read aloud from my 4th grade history textbook while my mom grew increasingly frustrated. "Why can't you just focus?" she'd snap. "Betty never has trouble with her reading." It was a refrain I'd hear countless times over the years. While Betty brought home straight A's and sports trophies, I found my passion in art and music. I spent hours sketching in my room or playing my second-hand guitar. But these pursuits were seen as frivolous by my parents. When I proudly showed my mom a portrait I'd drawn of our family dog, she barely glanced at it before asking if I'd finished my math homework. The favoritism extended far beyond academics. Every year, Betty got new clothes for school shopping, while I got hand-me-downs or thrift store finds. She had the latest gaming consoles and phones, while I made do with outdated technology. For her 16th birthday, my parents surprised Betty with a brand new car, a shiny red Volkswagen Beetle. When my 16th birthday rolled around a few years earlier, I'd received a used bike from the neighbor's garage sale. I remember confronting my mom about the unfairness when I was 17. We were in the kitchen, and I had just been told I couldn't go on the school trip to France because it was too expensive, even though Betty had gone on a similar trip the year before. When I pointed out the double standard, my mom's face hardened. "Well," she said coldly, "when you start bringing home grades like Betty's, maybe you'll deserve nice things too." My dad, 60M, wasn't as openly critical as my mom, but his silence was almost worse. He was always buried in his work as an accountant, leaving the child-rearing primarily to my mom. When I'd try to talk to him about the unfair treatment, he'd just shrug and say, "Your mother knows best." His passive enabling was, in many ways, as hurtful as my mom's active favoritism. The real kicker came when it was time for college. My parents paid Betty's full tuition to an expensive private university in California. She got a tearful send-off, complete with a new laptop and dorm accessories. When it was my turn to apply to schools, I was told matter-of-factly that they'd already spent too much on Betty's education and I'd have to figure it out myself. I ended up taking out massive loans to attend the state university an hour from our hometown. Those college years were tough. While Betty posted photos of beach parties and spring break trips, I worked 2 part-time jobs just to afford textbooks and ramen noodles. But it was also during this time that I really came into my own. Away from my parents' constant comparisons, I thrived in my art classes and even had a few pieces displayed in student showcases. After graduation, I made the difficult decision to move across the country to New York to pursue my art career. It was scary leaving everything I knew behind, but I felt suffocated in my hometown, always living in Betty's shadow. I limited contact with my family to occasional phone calls and obligatory holiday visits. Meanwhile, Betty followed the path my parents had always envisioned. She stayed close to home, got a job at a prestigious law firm, married her college sweetheart at 24, and had her first child by 26. My parents doted on their grandchildren and constantly pestered me about when I was going to settle down and start a real family. They seemed oblivious to the fact that I was building a life I loved, even if it didn't fit their narrow definition of success. 5 years ago, I met my now husband Matthew, 34M, at an art gallery opening. He's been incredibly supportive of my career and encouraged me to set better boundaries with my family. When we got married last year, we opted for a small, artistic ceremony in a sculpture garden. My parents and Betty attended, but they spent most of the time criticizing our unconventional choices, like my colorful dress and our food truck catering, rather than celebrating with us. Now, here's where the current situation comes in. Last month, my dad called out of the blue. At first, I thought maybe someone was sick or there was some kind of emergency. But no, apparently, their retirement savings took a big hit in the stock market crash, and they're struggling financially. Betty and her husband are having money troubles of their own due to some failed investments, so they can't help much. My dad asked if Matthew and I could lend them $50,000 to help them get back on their feet. I was absolutely stunned. After years of favoritism and financial support for Betty, they have the audacity to ask me for money? I told my dad I'd think about it and talk to Matthew, but internally I was seething. When I explained the situation to Matthew later that night, he was furious on my behalf. He pointed out that we've worked hard for our savings, and a lot of it is earmarked for fertility treatments we're planning to start soon. We've been trying to conceive for over a year with no luck, and the emotional and financial stress of that journey has been significant. Matthew said it's not our responsibility to bail my parents out, especially given our history. I agree with Matthew, but I'd be lying if I said I wasn't conflicted. Despite everything, there's still a part of me that craves my parents' approval and love. A tiny voice in my head whispers that maybe if I help them now, they'll finally see my worth. But a louder, more rational part knows that's unlikely to happen. After a few days of mulling it over, I called my dad back and told him we couldn't afford to help them right now. I tried to be gentle but firm, explaining that our own financial situation was tight due to the fertility treatments. My mom got on the phone and started guilt-tripping me immediately. She said I was being selfish and ungrateful, and that family should always come first. She brought up how they supported me through college, by which she meant co-signing my loans, which I'm still paying off, and said I owed them. When she started in on how Betty would help if she could, I lost my cool. I told her that maybe if they'd treated me fairly growing up, I'd be more inclined to help now. Betty called me later that day, absolutely furious. She said I was being petty and holding on to childhood grudges. She accused me of abandoning our parents in their time of need and said I should be ashamed of myself. When I tried to remind her of all the advantages she'd been given over the years, she dismissed it as ancient history and said I needed to grow up. I ended up hanging up on her. Now my whole family is mad at me. My parents are sending guilt-tripping texts daily, ranging from passive-aggressive, "I guess we know who we can really count on," to outright manipulative, "Your father's blood pressure is through the roof because of this stress. I hope you're happy." Betty and her husband are bad-mouthing me to our extended family, painting me as a selfish, ungrateful daughter who's abandoning her parents in their time of need. Even some aunts and uncles have reached out to express their disappointment in me. They don't know the full history. Of course, my parents have always been good at maintaining their perfect family image to the outside world. Matthew says I did the right thing and that I don't owe them anything. He's been amazingly supportive, even offering to field calls from my family to give me a break from the stress. But I can't help feeling conflicted. Am I being petty? Should I just give them the money to keep the peace? Or am I right to stand my ground after years of unfair treatment? I feel like I'm going crazy with all the guilt and second guessing. So, Reddit, I need some outside perspective. AITA for refusing to help my parents financially after years of favoritism towards my sister? Update 1. It's been about a month since my last post, and to say a lot has happened would be an understatement. First, I want to thank everyone for their supportive comments and advice. It really helped me gain perspective on the situation and gave me the strength to stand my ground. After my initial refusal to help, my parents doubled down on their guilt-tripping tactics. They started calling multiple times a day, leaving long voicemails about how I was breaking their hearts and tearing the family apart. My mom even went so far as to say that my refusal to help was causing my dad's health to deteriorate. It was emotionally exhausting. Things escalated when my mom showed up at my workplace unannounced one day. I work at a small art gallery in Brooklyn, and I was in the middle of giving a tour to some potential buyers when I saw her walk in. My heart dropped to my stomach. She made a beeline for me, ignoring my polite request to wait until I was finished. In front of my colleagues and clients, she started ranting about what an ungrateful daughter I was and how I was abandoning them in their time of need. It was humiliating and infuriating. My boss had to ask her to leave, and I spent the rest of the day hiding in the back room, mortified. That night, Matthew suggested we take a step back and go no contact for a while to clear our heads. We blocked their numbers and social media accounts, which gave us some much-needed peace. However, they then started reaching out to our friends and my in-laws, trying to get messages to us. It felt like we were being stalked. The situation came to a head 2 weeks ago. We were at a local art fair where I was exhibiting some of my work. It was a beautiful Saturday afternoon, and I was feeling optimistic. I'd already sold a few pieces and was chatting with a potential buyer when I spotted my parents and Betty approaching my booth. I immediately tensed up, but Matthew, who was helping me that day, squeezed my hand reassuringly. My mom started off with fake pleasantries, complimenting my art in a way that felt backhanded. "Oh, how interesting," she said, eyeing an abstract piece. "I suppose there's a market for everything these days." Then she launched into her usual spiel about family obligation and how desperate their situation was. Betty chimed in, saying I was being cruel and heartless. That's when Matthew stepped in. In all the years I've known him, I've never seen him so angry. He calmly but firmly told them that their behavior was unacceptable and that if they couldn't respect our boundaries, we'd have no choice but to get a restraining order. My dad looked shocked, while my mom and Betty sputtered indignantly. Seeing Matthew stand up for me gave me courage. I found my voice and told them that years of favoritism and emotional abuse had consequences. I said I was done being manipulated and that if they ever wanted a relationship with me in the future, they needed to take a long, hard look at their behavior and get professional help. They left in a huff, but not before my mom hissed that I'd regret this when they were old and dying. It was painful, but I also felt a weird sense of relief at finally standing up for myself. The aftermath has been mixed. Some extended family members who initially sided with my parents have reached out to apologize after hearing my side of the story. My Aunt Sarah, my mom's sister, called me in tears. She said she had no idea things were so bad and apologized for not seeing it sooner. That conversation was healing in a way I didn't expect. Others are still giving me the cold shoulder. My cousin Mark, who's always been close to Betty, sent me a scathing email about loyalty and family obligation. I chose not to respond. Betty sent a long, rambling email a week after the art fair incident. She accused me of exaggerating our childhood and claimed she had it hard too because of the pressure to be perfect. She said I was selfish for not helping our parents and that I was jeopardizing her children's future by not ensuring our parents had a stable retirement. It was clear she still didn't get it. On a personal note, Matthew and I have decided to move forward with our fertility treatments. We're excited about potentially starting our own family, one built on love and equal treatment. The process is daunting, but it feels good to be taking positive steps towards our future. I've also started seeing a therapist to work through some of my lingering issues from childhood. It's been challenging to unpack years of emotional baggage, but I already feel like I'm making progress. My therapist has been helping me recognize patterns of manipulation and giving me tools to set healthy boundaries. Work has been a mixed bag. The scene my family caused at the art fair actually led to increased interest in my work. Apparently, drama sells. I've sold several major pieces in the last few weeks. But I'm also dealing with lingering embarrassment from the incident at the gallery. My boss has been understanding, but I can't help feeling like my professional reputation has been tarnished. I still have moments of doubt and guilt, especially late at night when the house is quiet and my mind starts to wander. Did I do the right thing? Am I being too harsh? But overall, I feel like I'm on the right path. Setting firm boundaries with my family of origin has been difficult but necessary. For now, I'm focusing on building a life and support system with people who truly care about me, not what I can do for them. It's a work in progress, but for the first time in a long time, I feel hopeful about the future. Update 2: It's been about 3 months since my last update, and things have settled into a new normal. We've maintained our no-contact stance with my parents and Betty, which has been both liberating and challenging. There are days when I feel light and free, and others when the weight of family estrangement hits hard. The fertility treatments we started have been emotionally and physically taxing. The hormone injections make me feel like a pincushion, and the mood swings are intense. There have been moments of hope followed by crushing disappointment. But through it all, Matthew has been my rock. He's there with ice packs after injections, he holds me when the pregnancy tests come back negative, and he reminds me to stay hopeful. We're cautiously optimistic about our chances of conceiving, but we're also exploring adoption as an option. Last month, we received a certified letter from my parents. I was hesitant to open it, fearing more guilt-tripping or threats. My hand shook as I tore open the envelope. To my surprise, it contained a formal apology. They acknowledged their favoritism and the hurt it caused me. They said they've started seeing a family therapist to work on their issues and hope that someday we could rebuild our relationship. The letter felt surreal. Part of me wanted to believe it was genuine, while another part was deeply skeptical. I've been down this road before. My mom would occasionally apologize after a big fight, only to revert to her old behavior within days. I showed the letter to my own therapist, who advised caution and reminded me that true change takes time and consistent effort. After much deliberation, I decided to respond with a brief email. I thanked them for the apology and told them I was glad they were getting help. However, I made it clear that I wasn't ready to resume contact and that any future relationship would depend on their continued efforts to change and respect my boundaries. Betty hasn't reached out directly, but I heard through a cousin that she and her husband are also in counseling. Apparently, our confrontation at the art fair made her realize some hard truths about our family dynamics. I'm not sure how to feel about this information. Part of me hopes she's genuinely working on herself, but I'm wary of getting my hopes up. On a brighter note, my art career has been taking off. The publicity from the scene my family caused at the fair actually led to increased interest in my work. I've sold several major pieces and have been commissioned for a public mural in our city. It's a dream come true, but it also comes with its own set of pressures. I find myself working long hours, trying to capitalize on this momentum while it lasts. Matthew and I have been using this time to focus on strengthening our own little family unit. We've been having deep conversations about our values and how we want to raise our future children. We're both committed to creating a home environment that's the opposite of what I experienced growing up, one filled with unconditional love, support, and open communication. We've also been working on building a stronger support network. We've been spending more time with friends who feel like family, and I've reconnected with a few cousins who reached out after hearing about the situation with my parents. It feels good to be surrounded by people who accept and value me for who I am. There have been challenging moments too. The holidays were particularly tough. It was the first Thanksgiving and Christmas we didn't spend with my family, and the absence was palpable. We ended up hosting a Friendsgiving with other people who couldn't be with their families, which helped ease the loneliness. While the situation with my family is still unresolved, I feel more at peace than I have in years. I'm learning that it's okay to prioritize my own well-being and that setting boundaries doesn't make me a bad person. The future feels uncertain but full of possibilities. I still have days where I question my decisions, where I miss the idea of a close-knit family. But then I remind myself of how far I've come and the healthier relationships I'm building. It's a process, and I'm taking it one day at a time. Update 3. It's been 6 months since my last update, and life has taken some unexpected turns. The biggest news is that our fertility treatments were successful. I'm pregnant with twins. Matthew and I are over the moon, but also a bit terrified at the prospect of 2 babies at once. The first trimester was rough with morning sickness and fatigue, but now in my second trimester, I'm feeling much better. The pregnancy news brought up a lot of complicated feelings about family. As we started preparing for the babies, I found myself wishing I could share the joy with my parents and Betty, despite our issues. After much discussion with Matthew and my therapist, I decided to send them a brief email announcing the pregnancy. I made it clear that this wasn't an invitation to resume full contact, but rather a gesture of cautious optimism. Their responses were surprisingly mature. My parents sent a heartfelt congratulations and reiterated their commitment to changing their behavior. They asked if they could send a gift for the babies, which I agreed to after some hesitation. Betty's reply was shorter but sincere, expressing happiness for us and hope for reconciliation in the future. We're taking things very slowly. I've had a few short phone calls with my parents, always with clear boundaries set beforehand. They seem to be genuinely trying to respect my limits, which is encouraging. They haven't pushed for visits or tried to overstep, which is a big change from their past behavior. Betty and I have exchanged a few texts, mostly about the pregnancy and her kids. It's stilted and a bit awkward, but it's a start. The pregnancy has also brought up some fears for me. I'm terrified of repeating my parents' mistakes or showing favoritism to one twin over the other. Matthew and I have been reading parenting books and attending classes, determined to break the cycle of dysfunction. We've had long talks about our parenting philosophies and how to create a loving, equitable environment for both babies. As for our financial situation, the success of my art career has been a blessing. The mural commission led to more high-profile projects, and I've even had a small showing at a respected gallery in Manhattan. We've been able to save for the babies and even set aside a small emergency fund for my parents, should they truly need it in the future. It feels good to be in a position of strength rather than obligation. The pregnancy has forced me to slow down and take better care of myself, which has been a valuable lesson in self-care. I'm learning to say no to projects that don't align with my values or energy levels, and to prioritize my health and well-being. Looking ahead, I'm cautiously optimistic about the future of our family relationships. There's still a lot of work to be done, and I'm under no illusions that everything will magically be perfect. But I feel like we're on a path towards healing, even if it's a long and winding one. For now, Matthew and I are focused on preparing for the arrival of our little ones and building the kind of loving, supportive family we both always wanted. We've been setting up the nursery, choosing names, and imagining what life will be like with 2 newborns. It's exciting and terrifying all at once, but I'm grateful for this new chapter in our lives.